Hi everyone, and welcome to all state training authorities, members, guests, and interested parties. Thank you for joining with AUSMASA today for the Vocational Degree Information Session. My name is Adrian Lee, Executive Director, Training and Workforce Innovation. I'd like to start today with a welcome to country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we live and work. Here in Melbourne, we are situated on the traditional lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. As we are from many different locations today, we acknowledge traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We honour and respect their elders, past and present, and extend our respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Before we get started, I just want to confirm that we are recording today's session, which will be available to all participants. We also have a Q&A available in today's webinar for you to participate with the panel, so feel free to drop in your questions. To kick off today's session, I would like to introduce the AUSMASA team. In the room today, we have Marilyn Connell, Manager Workforce Innovation, Annie Barry, Manager Training Products, and Mike Barker, Workforce Innovation Lead. Today's session will cover an introduction to the vocational degree, what it is and why we need it, project timeline and key findings, Phase 1 feasibility study and analysis, and also Phase 2 qualification scoping and initial implementation plan. We'll also talk about our next steps, including Phase 3, the training product development, our request for tender process, and at the end of today's session, we'll have a live Q&A pending time, but feel free to stick around for that. I thought I would also like to take this opportunity to provide you with a quick background to who we are and what we do. The Jobs and Skills Councils are nationally funded under a grant agreement from DUA. There are 10 JSCs, each aligned to various industries, with AUSMASA being the JSC for mining and automotive. AUSMASA are custodians for 3 training packages on the National Training Register, AUM, AUR, and RII Mining. As Jobs and Skills Councils, we all have 4 core functions, which involve workforce planning, training product development, implementation and monitoring, and industry stewardship. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over now to Marilyn to tell us more about this exciting new training product and take us through today's session. Over to you, Marilyn.
Thank you very much, Adrian, for that introduction, and welcome to everyone. So excited to be here today to be able to share the information session on our vocational degree project. And it's great to see some familiar names amongst the participants today that we've had at our roundtables, at our interviews, as a part of our discipline panel, steering committees, and so on. So welcome to you all. As Adrian has said, my name is Marilyn Connell. I am the Manager for Workforce Innovation, and as a part of that role, I'm actually privileged to be able to work on this flagship product, the vocational degree, particularly in Phase 2. I will be covering Phase 1 and Phase 2 today, and then I'll hand over to my colleague Annie Barry to come in and give us an overview of where we're heading in Phase 3. Now, when I was preparing the slide deck today, I was thinking I should change the opening slide and freshen it up, but then I feel that the missing middle really encapsulates the vocational degree and all that it has to offer. So I just felt that it was absolutely appropriate to leave it there as our opening slide for today's presentation. And I'd like to attribute that to Professor Peter Noonan, who actually conceptualised the missing middle in relation to education. He was very passionate about access to a high quality education for all. reform in the vocational education and higher education sector, and just generally access and equity for all, and a supporter of lifelong learning for all Australians and the transformative power of education, particularly people that are often overlooked in gaps in our education system. He felt that VET and higher education should not be two separate systems, but one system that's made up of two sectors. And he wrote about the seamless pathway from VET to higher education and higher education to VET, and how it's essential that, as I say, that should be a seamless pathway. And I felt that that set the scene for our vocational degree info session today. So making progress towards achieving these goals in February of 2025, so actually very recently, education ministers endorsed the vocational degree. It was actually a response to the 2023 employment white paper, and you'll be relieved that I'm not going to get into addendum number 7 on the webinar today, but it was to address an area where they found that people were increasingly in need of higher level tertiary education skills, as jobs required more employees with advanced levels of technical knowledge and skills. And so whilst I'm not going to get any further into that particular aspect, I am going to share with you a description from the AQF website today, just in brief, so that we have the background for the AQF 7 vocational degree. And that is that it targets specialist knowledge and technical skills. So skills to analyse and evaluate information, solutions to unpredictable and complex problems. And we heard continuously at our roundtables the need for critical thinking and higher level diagnostic ability. And we particularly had those conversations around AI, emerging technologies and so on. I think it came up at nearly every single one. And so as we've moved on to now, we've got the definition of the vocational degree, and that was actually extracted from the addendum that was actually published at that point in time. And we were guided by this definition throughout our process for this project. And what I'd like to sort of extract from that and share with you is that it's a technical qualification. And that so it's very much skills-based for learners with an access to workplace and work integrated learning at AQF level 7, which is critical, and it's often linked to a contract of training with applicable standards for associated industries. So we're looking at peak bodies there. So perhaps in an engineering space, that might be Engineers Australia. So ensuring that we have that alignment there. So how does the vocational degree fit into our educational landscape? And I would like to sort of emphasise at this point that it's not replacing higher education, it's actually moving into a gap that exists in the education sphere. So looking, as we mentioned at the start, at equity and access for all. So learners who may not traditionally have chosen a theoretical university pathway. So the vocational degree is AQF level 7 with progression to AQF 8. Now this came up again and again in our consultative process, that we must have parity of pathways between the two into a master's. The vocational degree is delivered in the vocational sector, not in the higher education sector, with a technical occupation specific focus. A duration of 1 to 3 years as opposed to 3 to 4, and it's competency-based learning and assessment as opposed to theoretical and conceptual assessment. And as I mentioned previously, it's often linked to a contract of employment, and it's focused on its practical training. So what we actually also, I'd like to share with you at this moment, that we discovered when we were talking with industry, that they often sort of tried to approach the requirement for practical skills in an informal basis by encouraging higher education graduates into work placements or into the workplace during holidays and so forth, to actually bridge the gap of that requirement for practical skills, whereas the vocational degree has that work integrated learning component right the way through the degree process. So now we'll move on to the timeline of the Vocational Degree Project, and we can see from this that phase 1 was actually completed, in June of 2025. That was a feasibility study that we conducted in relation to the vocational degree, and then we moved on to a co-design approach, which was informed by phase 1, and that concluded just yesterday on the 19th of January. So very, very excited to announce that we have submitted our final report on phase 2 to DUA, and I'd like to use this opportunity to give a big shout out to our consultant, Claire Werner of the Maven Group, that actually worked extremely hard and produced a very complex and informative report on that. So thank you very much to her. Thank you also to our AUSMASA team in relation to that. We have many different facets that all contributed to that. Our PMO, our marketing, our research team. So thank you very much to all of those. So as we say, phase 2 is hot off the press as we speak. And I might use this opportunity, without sort of moving into your space, Adrian, to let you know that we're going to, or hoping to have the report published on our website in the next couple of months. Look out for that. We will pop an announcement on social media in our journey, so you'll be able to view the report in all its 167 pages, I think, and 75 pages of appendices on our website. And then we are moving into phase 3 from March of 2026. And Annie's going to share with us a little bit about phase 3. So now I'm going to share an overview of the project to date, starting with phase 1. So phase 1, as I mentioned, was a feasibility study. Was there a need and an appetite for a vocational degree? As simple as that. So we did a lot of industry consultation, looked at the opportunity for the qualification out there, and actually did a lot of research and environmental scan, and the response was an overwhelming yes and yes. So what we heard over and over again was that the Certificate 3, Certificate 4 higher achieving tradespeople coming into that vocational degree space didn't quite have the theoretical knowledge, the advanced maths skills, the critical thinking skills developed. And the degree graduates coming into that space were too theoretical and disconnected from these positions and their practical requirements. So neither were well prepared for the role. So as a part of that phase 1, we did do an environmental scan. We looked at what was available nationally and internationally. And so we looked at 3 different models, particularly across the UK, Germany and Canada. And without sort of getting into the specifics of those and appreciating that different contexts, different backgrounds, the common theme between all 3 was that there was at least 50% of those programs took place in the workplace. So workplace learning integrated across all 3. So taking the learnings from those, I would also like to share, that we actually, in our conversations with the automotive and mining sector, we did an analysis of roles that might be appropriate for our initial rollout of the vocational degree. So as you're aware, we work across the automotive and mining sector, as Adrian shared. So looking in the automotive space, what we found was there wasn't a clear or distinct difference and delineation between the roles, and it wasn't always apparent that it was those roles were operating at an AQF level 7. We also found evidence of an insufficient volume of numbers for an initial rollout to make that feasible in the automotive space. Moving into the mining sector, we found that there was a strong appetite for a new education pathway at AQF level 7. And we actually looked at 4 different roles. So we looked at the metallurgy technician, the field geotechnician, we looked at the reliability engineer, and we looked at the testing engineer. What we found with the metallurgy technician and the field geotechnician, that again, in a similar vein, there wasn't sufficient numbers perhaps in those roles to make an initial rollout feasible for the vocational degree. So we ended up landing on the reliability and testing engineers roles. Having said that, I'd like to sort of move forward a little bit and mention that the structure of the degree, or the guiding sort of draft, if you like, of the degree units we have developed are industry agnostic at the core level. So could be actually go across many different roles, and as we get further down the presentation, I will share that with you, and you'll be able to see that. I'd also like to take this moment to share with you that when we have done previous presentations on the vocational degree, we found from our participants at those presentations that this could actually roll out across a number of sectors, not just mining. It's actually, we had interest from St. John's Ambulance, the Defence Force, just to name a couple, but it's really very encouraging that, that the number of industries that the vocational degree can actually run across, particularly the reliability engineer. So focusing on developing absolutely at this point a sustainable and scalable model. So looking at the reliability engineer and how does that actually fit into the modern engineering ecosystem, if you like, and what exactly is a reliability engineer? So it's a role that demands specialist knowledge and technical skill to uplift the reliability of an asset right throughout its life cycle. And I'm going to just mention here that my background isn't in engineering, but I can say that I know a lot more about engineering now than I did right at the very start of this project. So thank you to all for your patience. So we found out that the reliability engineer, through its role, could actually be proactive, reactive, and most often sat in a space somewhere in the middle, depending on the organisation that they actually were involved in. They were sort of described as the connective tissue, if you like, of the complex systems in our industries. We heard over and over again that run to failure is no longer an option. Just the sheer cost of breakdown was absolutely enormous. Some of the stories that we heard took my breath away. Anyway, we heard, just to share one, about a small pulley that was under a massive mining conveyor belt and how that failed and caused significant and costly downtime. And this is absolutely the area that the reliability engineer operates in. And I'm going to take this moment to share a story with you when we were working across our targeted interviews for this role. And it was a story that actually really, I guess, cemented in my mind how integral this role and how critical it is to progress the vocational degree in this space, because we don't have anything that services it at this stage. And it was a conversation with someone that actually has a double degree from university. It's a mechanical and I think it was aeronautical engineering degree, and actually with honours, so had studied for 4 years in university, and then moved into the workplace and said, okay, now show me the equipment. So this entire time it had been theoretical learning, had not seen the equipment that they were actually sort of studying towards using, and then had to progress through a 24-month internal training program, and a very, very well executed program, but very intensive to actually give those practical and on-the-job skills. This actually was usually through a condition monitoring pathway, maintenance pathway, asset health, moving into the reliability engineer. So it was really interesting to hear that story. And you know, we asked the question, well, how do you recruit into that role? And they shared that they cast the net wide, they have to recruit on foundational skills with it then a view to moving them through that pathway. And they shared also, you know, again, the high level, high achieving tradesperson still going on to acquire those critical thinking skills, the higher education graduate also then coming on to acquire those practical skills. So it was that story that really cemented to me that there is absolutely a critical need for this, for the vocational degree in reliability engineering, and to be moved on through on a broader scale. So this role absolutely suited the initial rollout. It was future focused, it was automation, data driven, technologically advanced. And just to close off on that experience, we found informally, because the reliability engineer doesn't actually have an occupation code, so we had to, the research was done informally, there are approximately 6,000 adverts sitting in this space on any one day, which might be sort of in the condition monitoring, asset health, reliability engineering space. So an enormous amount of recruitment going on in that particular area. So now I'll move on to phase 2 and the co-design journey, which is where the rubber really starts to hit the road, and we actually start to pull it all together. So developing a complex functional analysis, we confirmed this co-design approach and started the discipline refinement process. So as I mentioned, there was no occupation code for the reliability engineer. So inquiries and progress have already been made in that particular space because it's essential to map it to the national priorities and skills shortages and funding and so forth. Moving into the second aspect of the phase is the qualification design and structure. So looking at how that functional analysis then comes into a draft qualification and design. Industry engagement and role alignment. So validating the graduate profile with employers, ensuring that, again, we're in touch with the peak bodies and have them on very much on the journey on the road, and gathering letters of support. And I thank everyone for their letters of support out there for industry training organisations. Just take this moment to say thank you. I had another one come in yesterday. So thank you very much for that support. It's absolutely essential to continue our good work in this project. The next aspect was industrial relations and workforce development. So mapping to awards, ensuring that the role is actually recognised and integrated into our modern day awards. You know, and we've identified an award in the report, and looking at where that fits in, taking advice of experts in that area and ensure that we're heading in the right direction and all walking that path together. So testing the adoption with the unions, employers association, developing a recognition of prior learning framework, ensuring that we can actually create that seamless pathway that we discussed at the start. And then not to forget our training organisation. So we develop a vocational degree, we must be able to deliver it training organisations in partnership with our industry partners. So we have developed a comprehensive list of requirements for implementation. We have socialised that with our training organisation, identified where we need to overlap into industry, into training, and how to approach that. And then the final validation and reporting. And as I mentioned yesterday, that came to a close. So looking at now, how did we approach the co-design process? We did that through a steering committee and discipline panel. Now, our steering committee actually was provided the oversight and governance for phase 2. And they actually were consisted of unions, industry. So we had peak bodies in there, Engineers Australia, we had RTOs, we had Centres of Excellence, we had TAFE Directors Australia. So thank you very much to all of those people. We had a discipline panel as well that provided the technical expertise. So that was stacked full of engineers. So we didn't only have academic engineers, we had engineers on there with lived experience. So coming on in their high vis, we can see it all happening in the background, and very grateful for the hours they take out of their day. We had someone on our discipline panel that had lived experience as an engineer, but also actually was from the vocational education sector. So what a valuable combination that person was. We had technical experts, we had academic experts. Yeah, again, a huge, and I've got it highlighted on my page, a thank you to these people for their time, expertise, valuable insights to provide that rigour to phase 2 as we move forward into actually developing this qualification. And can I say that because of the timeframes, we had a really an active cadence to our meetings. Sometimes the discipline panel were meeting weekly. And so, you know, and they had a lot of content to go through, as you can see from what I'm sharing today. So again, applause and thank you to all those people. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to quickly touch on now the recommendations that we responded to, ensuring that we actually touched on all the key areas highlighted in phase 1. I'm only going to sort of call out a few, and one was to address the lack of OSCA or previously ANSCO recognition. We've already started conversations in that space. And particularly also with our research department here to get that progressing. Engineers Australia recognition, it was continually, every time we breathed, it was mapped back to Engineers Australia Stage 1 competencies, ensuring that when the RTOs apply to have the qualification and delivery recognised by Engineers Australia, we can make that as, you know, sort of a seamless pathway as possible for them. And I'd also like to sort of give a bit of a shout out now to the Engineers Australia's representatives that we had on our steering committee and discipline panel, and for all the time that they had put into this phase. Thank you very much. We actually refined the sample product so that will guide our training product development. So, and I'm super excited to get to that slide. I know that you'll all be waiting for that to see what that looks like. And lastly on there, the delivery partnership. So the work integrated learning in this aspect is a strong bridge to work practices, and joining with our training providers on that is essential. So that was very much targeted throughout the process. So sharing a few of the focus areas and challenges and benefits of phase 2, I just sort of would like to say that, you know, I look at the challenges and then I say, well, let's flip that around, and there's benefits there. So we can see on there's the differentiation of the vocational degree. So that has been part of the, I guess, the focus of attending events and sharing the progress of the vocational degree, and, you know, on our pathway and our journey, if you like, what have we found so far? What can we share? And let's collectively come together with all our expertise on this journey, which has absolutely been fantastic. And thank you to all of those people that have come up and said that they were happy to share some time. And we have usually been very quick to respond to that. Our VET and higher education entry and exit pathways, again, that seamless pathway from one to the other. And how does it fit into our educational landscape in relation to that? And the funding that is related to the qualification. It's always something that is, you know, sort of at the forefront of everyone's mind, the bringing all together all of the information and our approach to that and making sure that we are commencing those conversations. And looking at the benefits, so addressing the industry shortages out there. And I'd just like to say here that it actually speaks to, particularly we found in our conversations with our industry partners, to retention out there within the workplace, which actually builds our workforce and stops that churn that we are all experiencing out there, because it actually offers a pathway, a formal pathway to people where currently, as we've heard, there is a gap. So we heard that from many of our targeted interviews out there. And so looking at, you know, again, equitable participation, building the diversity, equity, gender, and Indigenous representation in our workforce, all building towards those benefits within the vocational degree. So looking at our functional analysis, moving forward to sort of, I guess, looking at the mechanics of phase 2 and how did we actually bring it together. So the functional analysis actually looked at 11 functions and actually split those. And if we could just pop back to the previous slide, if I may, Mike. So split those into workplace and teaching and learning focuses. So each of the 11 functions, we had the application for a reliability engineer. Then we looked at how did that look from a knowledge perspective. How did that look for specialist skills? And what in that particular function did they need to have experience with and exposure to? And again, that was driven by our technical experts. So all of this passed through, was reviewed, analysed and endorsed by our discipline panel, and then came through our decision gates with our steering committee. Now, our functional analysis was actually divided into 4 sort of themes, if you like. So the first was broad and coherent knowledge. The second was cognitive and technical analysis skills. Third was an application of knowledge, and fourth was communication. So now we can move on to the next slide. Thanks, Mike. So looking at these, all of the 11 functions here, we can see that many of them are industry agnostic functions. So you can see something like cross-functional collaboration. That's a skill that's used across many different industries and vocations. So it has a broad range of roles there. And we can see standards and compliance. And these were things that were brought up again and again by our technical experts. So absolutely endorsed by through the 2 different panels that we had. So progressing to the mapping process that we used from the functional analysis. So we started with a functional analysis and then actually did a little bit of a circular mapping process. Is probably the best way for me to describe it. So we went from the functional analysis to graduate outcomes, and then they transformed into capability clusters so that we could actually develop from that suggested or draft units names and looking at the functions that sat within that, and then developing that qualification structure. Throughout that, the circular mapping that I'm referring to is constantly mapping that back to the Stage 1 competencies for Engineers Australia and the Sydney Accord. The Sydney Accord is a global agreement between organisation that accredits engineering degree programs. So to support our diverse workforce there, it's essential that we actually mapped to both of those. So that actually every time, as I say, we made a change, we mapped that back to the stage 1 competencies. So now the big reveal, we've got the draft qualification structure. And as I mentioned, this is absolutely draft, so it still has to move through phase 3, which is where I move off to Annie and her team in that particular area, which is, of course, always done in consultation with our technical committees and specialists, but I'm going to let Annie expand on that. So looking at the actual qualification itself and the packaging rules, as we like to call it in the trade. So I just get you to move back to the previous slide, if I may, Mike. We've got 20 core units and 5 electives. So you can see in the dark green box, we've got a suggested lot of 5 themes where there are units sitting inside of those, and that's where the electives will sit. We've also got specialisations electives. So you might remember me suggesting at the start, one of the roles that we looked at was the testing engineer. And so through our discussion with our discipline panel and our steering committee, it was decided that the testing area was smaller in number and an area that perhaps crossed across to the original equipment manufacturers. So that was probably best placed as a specialisation within the reliability engineering degree. So to achieve that, you actually complete, it's suggested at this stage that you actually complete the units at the bottom of the screen that you can see there. Now, I will actually again reiterate that it is actually draft at this stage, so it's not set in stone and it hasn't passed through the formal process, but it's very exciting to have it at this stage where it has, as I say, passed through those decision gates of the steering committee and the discipline panel. So now moving on to the qualification structure and what does it look like as it rolls out through those 3 years. It actually starts with a foundation year. So structured exposure, developing that foundational knowledge, then moving on to our year 2, which is applied practice and a supervised contribution back into that workplace. Then on to year 3, which is your integrated application and, using that higher level critical thinking, professional judgment, with each year building capability and developing that specialist knowledge and technical skills required at an AQF level 7. So actually scaffolding that learning throughout that process. So now we have what I always think of as the cornerstone or the value proposition of the vocational degree, and that's the work integrated learning. That is actually, it's not optional in the program, it's actually a core component of the degree. So it's essential to actually provide that practical knowledge. So integrating theoretical knowledge and professional practice in the workplace. And we all know how valuable that is. Exercising judgment in those uncertain conditions that we can't replicate even within a training organisation. So it's essential that the degree has at least 50% work integrated learning. These will be scaffolded workplace experience to reinforce those core concepts as we move through that 3-year journey. And it also strengthens the transfer of learning across a multiple asset environment, which is what is essential in the role of a reliability engineer. And I'd actually like to say that the work integrated learning actually plays a critical role in the transition from a technical role at the start of the 3-year journey into an applied professional practice, I beg your pardon. So that's the 3-year sequence that must be sort of substantial, structured and carefully sequenced and scaffolded across those 3 years to build that capability. And so sharing an insight into the detailed consultation and development and guidelines that we actually have in the report, we actually even looked at what assessments might look like in that particular space and how the assessments in year 1 are simple data interpretation tasks, reflections, they're developmental at that point. Year 2, they're more substantive investigation, note, condition monitoring outputs, analysis, simple reliability tasks. With year 3, looking at advanced capability, investigation reports, reliability and analysis, conducting technical briefings. These were all things that the discipline panel worked through, reported on, and sort of reviewed, updated, and we had, as you probably saw, we had 7 versions of our functional analysis before we landed on something that we actually felt was truly reflective of the role. So you can see the work that's gone into developing this complex but very informative report from which we will launch into phase 3. So moving on to the next aspect, which is what is essential in any work integrated learning program, and it's a shared responsibility. It's a shared responsibility absolutely for the learner, the employer and the provider. That open communication is critical so that we have clear expectations and an understanding of the outcomes in that particular space, and AUSMASA absolutely playing a key role in that with industry stewardship and along our 4 themes that Adrian shared with us at the start: implementation, promotion, monitoring, and being very much on that journey with our all 4 key roles being integrated into that shared responsibility model. What I would actually also like to touch on here, because if you're like me, you're wondering, what about learners that aren't currently employed in suitable workplaces? And we looked at developing system level solutions to ensure that we actually have that equitable access to education that we talked about right at the very start. And so the approaches that were discussed and endorsed and supported by industry at this point were coordinated rotations across partner employers, structured placements, shared industry hosted learning experience. So, and these will all actually be refined and further developed in phase 3. But our guiding principle at this point is that no learner's development should be constrained by the operational limitations of a single workforce. So access and equity for all in that particular space, particularly for small to medium employers that may not have that access to required equipment, etc. So now that lays the foundation to move forward into phase 3. And on that note, I'd really like to hand over to my colleague Annie Barry to give us an insight into that particular phase. Thank you very much, Annie, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So as Marilyn's already stated, in phase 3, we will turn the research and validation that we conducted during phases 1 and 2 into accredited training products. For this, we'll follow the Training Product Organising Framework, which is the regulatory framework that governs all training package development in Australia. And to develop the training packages, AUSMASA will stand up a technical committee that will comprise of subject matter experts in industry, educational experts, state and territory representatives with relevant expertise, as well as RTOs. The expression of interest form to join the technical committee will be up on the project webpage soon. And if you subscribe to the project, you'll receive an email notifying you that this is available, should you be interested to join that technical committee. The development of the training products themselves is going to be a co-design process where we will be collaborating with the education consultant, technical committee, and also continue our consultation with the stakeholders that were identified in in phase 2 of the project. So the way we're building the qualification, we're aiming for it to be flexible so that it enables updates for technology advancements in the future. To achieve this, the way that we've set it up, the elective model means that new units can be added as technology evolves, without redeveloping the entire qualification, with packaging rules supporting new specialisations as the roles emerge. We're also using this opportunity to let you know that AUSMASA is seeking an experienced education consultant to go co-design and develop this new AQF Level 7 vocational degree in reliability engineering. The consultant that will be leading the project will make sure that the qualification is structured, evidence-based and primarily mining focused, while incorporating cross-sector input where appropriate, and develop nationally accredited training products. The full details are in our request for tender document, and you can download a copy. So we'll put up the QR code for you. You can download a copy or register your interest. If you don't have access to using your camera to download from the QR code, we'll also pop the link to the page in the Q&A section as well, so you've got access to that. The tenders are open now, and they're open until 5 p.m. Monday, 26th of January. So we encourage all those interested in putting forward an expression of interest to do so. We're also happy to answer any questions. And from here, I will pass it back to Adrian.
Okay, thanks for running through that, Annie. That's a fantastic presentation from our team, Annie, Marilyn, and to the teamwork behind the scenes. To round out the day today, we are more than happy to take any questions that have come through on the chat. There is that Q&A session that we spoke of, and for anyone to type in their questions, and we'll read through those. I believe, Mike, you're running that that information board. So if you want to let us know what questions have come through, and we'll engage with the audience and provide some feedback.
I can do that, Mike, if you like.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Annie.
So I already answered one in there. Was a question about sharing the slide deck. Yes, we're happy to share the slide deck as well as the recording once it's been made available. There's a question here for you, Marilyn. So Kate is saying that she missed the beginning of the session and she'd like to know why the decision was made to focus on mining and exclude automotive.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for that question. And because I do think that it's an opportunity to sort of revisit that. And actually, Mike, I might get you to drop back to the slide that actually details all of the roles that were initially identified in phase 1. Which I think it follows the one after the flags, just to give you a little bit of a tip. Now, what actually happened through phase 1, we did actually look at mining and automotive. What we found in the automotive sector, we highlighted, I think we've got 7 roles that were actually highlighted. So I think if we move probably a little bit further through the slide pack, just roles, yes, to the next slide. That's it. Thank you, Mike. So we can see on the screen there the roles that were initially identified. It wasn't really clear. There wasn't clear delineation between the roles in automotive, and it wasn't always clear in these roles that they were at true AQF level 7. And one of the primary aspects being the volume to make training initially feasible feasible. So looking at the roles in the mining sector, we also actually identified some of those where we didn't have the volume to move forward, but then settled on the reliability engineer because we had a volume in that particular space, and also a strong appetite from industry and support for us to develop that role. But as I mentioned sort of a little bit further down the track, what we've actually found is that the reliability engineer is not actually exclusive to mining. It actually goes across, as I say, defence. We've had conversations with the St. John's Ambulance. We've had conversations in a number of other industry areas just to ensure that we're sort of it was actually a truly scalable project. So it's also keeping in mind that it's an initial rollout. So sort of down the track, we're thinking that this actually absolutely can grow. So it wasn't that automotive was overlooked. It was for those reasons that we felt that the reliability engineer was probably more suited to that initial rollout. Thanks, Annie. Is there any further questions?
Yes, I've got one here that asks, does AQSA, or is that supposed to be ASQA? I'm sorry if you've got those mixed up, so I'm just going to clarify there. And AUSMASA have experience developing AQ7 units?
Yeah, thank you for that. That's also a really good question because it gives me the opportunity to share that we have been in communication with the regulators. So, have had information sessions with ASQA where we've had sort of discussed the project, discussed that our focuses and directions are aligned, that our even back to the definition of a reliability engineer, where did that definition come from? What are we doing? Looking at volumes of learning, looking at the work integrated learning. So absolutely had those conversations with the regulators. That will actually come and sort of be further visited, I'm imagining, in phase 3 as well. So they're definitely on that journey with us and ensuring that we keep those lines of communication open.
Thank you. Another one here says, my query is regarding pathway into vocational degree, though this is still a challenge, like you mentioned, Marilyn, that needs understanding at this stage. Will there be a set pathway needed for entry into vocational degree? And there's others there, but I'll stop there. I'll pause there for you to answer that. And she's just got a comment here, like, will students need to have completed a certain AQF level qual to enter into vocational degree, or will it work more like HE degree where students can commence this AQF level 7 degree after completing year 12?
That's actually a really good question. And what, with the approach for open education for all, there will not be a prerequisite at this stage. That's the thought. And again, just to revisit that, these are absolute guidelines and suggested drafts that are moving forward now through to the formal process. But at this point, there are no prerequisites to move into that. Of course, there are requirements within our standards and regulatory systems that we must work with our learners to ensure that they're coming into and are suited and set up for success within the qualification that they're entering into.
And another great question here, Marilyn. Can you please provide more insight into the statement that 50% will be work integrated learning, scaffolded workplace experiences? Could you please clarify what 50% looks like, learning, assessment time, etc.?
Yeah, that's actually all these really good questions. And again, we've got pages and pages of guidelines in our report that will be moving forward, and we're thinking will actually be firmed up and perhaps offer a structure in the companion volumes of exactly what the work integrated learning looks like. But what it means is that that training, that volume of learning is actually undertaken within the workplace as opposed to within a training organisation. But again, that will actually be, there'll be examples, case studies and so on that will actually be presented so that the students, the workplace, the training organisation all have clarity of exactly what does the work integrated learning component look like.
Okay, I think we've got time for one more. And may I just state at this time, if we don't get to your question, we will provide answers directly back to you. So if I don't read them out, our apologies, is only due to time constraints. So the next one, Marilyn, how do you see this vocational degree in terms of entry and exit pathways, both within VE and HE? Will there, for example, be a set of nested vocational qualifications such as diploma or advanced diploma? Likewise, how might student pathways between a part or full vocational degree and a HE bachelor or master's degree, specialising areas within current engineering degrees which may impact recognition for master's entry?
Okay, Annie, that's a big question, and I will actually, I'm just, because I know I'll forget the last part, so I'm quickly scratching down my notes. So what I'm going to do, recognising that we're short on for time, I'm going to address that question by saying that the entry and exit from higher education to VET, that we have actually been in conversation with higher education institutions who are very, very open to joining up with us in this degree. And we've already having conversations about recognition of the vocational degree and coming straight into their honours program or master's program. And from their perspective, actually also looking at our electives and saying, yes, we might, send some of our students to you to actually do specialisations in your electives. So a very open dialogue there that we've had throughout phase 2. There are suggested approaches in the reports to credit points and so on. So navigating that process, that will absolutely sort of progress through to phase 3. So nothing at all finalised there, but absolutely suggested approaches from our initial conversations with higher education. And I'd also I think there was an aspect, Mike, I know we're getting to the end and you're going to give me the wind up. Just very quickly, you mentioned RPL, Annie, in that question. Our RPL is absolutely a focus for this. The first cohort that comes through will have significant job and workplace experience. So developing those RPL tools alongside of the qualification being developed will be an absolute focus for AUSMASA. And, sort of we're having initial conversations in that space already. So, so thank you very much for that question. And I will hand back, I think, to Adrian at this point. Thank you very much, everyone. Fantastic to be a part of this session. Back to you, Adrian.
So some great questions there, and we thank you all for your participation today. From all of the team here at AUSMASA, we thank you for your time and look forward to next steps and the release of the published Phase 2 document. As mentioned in today's session, we encourage applicants to submit interest to the current tender process to support in this critical work. And from here, we will continue to provide updates to this release and towards the commencement of the Phase 3 component via our website, monthly publications and direct correspondence. To the AUSMASA team, great work and well done on this amazing flagship project. And thank you all again to attendees. We look forward to continuing the journey with you all throughout the year. Bye for now.